uneasy stuff going on there. I mean, they did those lobotomies, and so many people died up there, and there were, oh my God, tens of thousands, if I remember right, in the cemetery. They only had like a couple hundred in the one that was forgotten at the, I think it was Burlington High School or Residual High School went and they kind of restored it a little bit. But the stories up there are kind of, there's like angry men, like a really angry guy. And then the little girl, she's got a red ball. That one, I'm not sure where that comes from. And I don't know why a little girl would have been up there unless she had tuberculosis, because I know that they had TB people up there in the hospital in the sanitarium too. But there's a lot of stories about like moaning and like hollering and scaring kind of stuff. And I can imagine the pain and torment that the people were in. When they shut the place down in, the late 70s, I think it was, they turned those people loose on the streets. And the ones that were criminally insane, of course, they went to, like, Silicon, down there. But the other ones, they just turned loose on the street. And just the unsettled people up there, it's crazy. They just, like, walked out of there. The doctors and nurses and stuff, it's like they left their equipment behind and stuff. And you could see, like, the little... There was a children's area in one of the wings, as a matter of fact, because I remember it had little children's feet prints, like walking towards, like, the bathroom or something. They were painted on there so the kids knew which way to go or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
But they still had that kind of stuff there. But then underneath of it, there's tunnels. And back in the 70s, they still had, like, jeeps down there, and they had stockpiles of, like, food stuff and all kinds of equipment. I think it was some kind of, like, a shelter or something like that it was military-based anyway.
Well, what's, since you mentioned that, you've got the National Guard Armory just down the road from Northern State, so that would make sense as far as it being military. But, you've heard the rumors, and for listeners that aren't from the area, Northern State was a mental hospital. So you got Western State, which is, again, Steilacoom area, and you got Northern State, which is here in Cedar Woolley, Washington. And they opened, correct me if I'm wrong, they opened it in the 1920s, I believe, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so it was, say again?
They called it the Bughouse. The Bughouse, like B-U-G, Bughouse.
Okay. So we have, it's secure, it's locked up, nobody can go in there now. And a lot of that's because of vandalism, people breaking windows, people spray painting things, people being people, paranormal groups wanting to go in there and play. And so they've locked it off, it's got security, you can't go in there. But you can go in the dairy farm area. So, at one point in its peak, Northern State Mental Hospital was completely self-contained. They had their own creamery. They had their own dairy farm. Everything they did, Northern State was a completely self-contained community, essentially, for the criminally insane, for for all the... Think back in 1912, the 1900s. If you acted weird, or if, depression, different kinds
menopause.
of... Say again?
Menopause. There are menopausal
go.
women in there.
So, anything that wasn't understood, they put them in Northern State.
Yep.
And they did lobotomies, they did electroshock therapy, they did all kinds of experimental crap on, these sometimes innocent people. Not all of them were criminally insane, not all of them had mental health issues. So what we find, because we have gone up there a couple times and investigated, again, FMP doesn't go to hotspots, generally speaking, but we go up there for training once a year, or two different hotspots. I think we're going to go to Fort Casey this year. But I've been up there a couple times, One with the Ghost Crew of Canada, the Haunted Crew of Canada with Mike Morin, and Markham, our scientist. Was it Markham? Yeah, Markham, our scientist, went with us, and we tried out the paranormal puck, and we actually got names. Now, this was last year. I can't remember the names, but what was cool, and that was my first experience using the paranormal puck, we were actually sitting in the dairy barn, and we asked what the spirit did for employment there, and the name cow came up. we looked at each other and were like, huh, so did you milk the cows? And, it said yes, and we actually got intelligent communication. But what you find in the dairy, the dairy farm area is the spirits there are calm. They're more peaceful. They're sad, but they're not malevolent. You go to the creamery. Say again?
They're kind of like slow and easy going, like.
Well, if you think about it, the criminal is saying they're going to be locked up and secure. The more violent ones that might not be criminally insane or seen more of a danger, kind of like what we see in the prisons today. The less, the less violent, they go out and pick up garbage along the highway, whatnot. I can see it being the same. I can see it being the same in Northern State. If they're just there, they're depressed. Put them in the, get them out as caretakers of the animals. Or, milking the cows, taking care of the horses.
Well,
things that.
The interesting thing about that was not only that it was self-contained, but it actually was turning a profit, quite a large profit. And the people that were there running it, the patients that were there and stuff, like you were saying when you're talking about how they weren't benevolent or anything. That's because the ones that they had out there were like some of them were like they were retarded a little bit. I don't know if that's the right way to say it, but they were slower, just like depressed. And just those are the ones, like you're saying, that weren't criminally insane, but they did everything. They had the chickens, they had the cows, they had the gardening. They even had their own crematorium in there. It was just a little hubbub of its own, and the people that were there, they were like innocent people that they did this horrible experimentations with and stuff.
And the closer you get to the actual mental hospital property is where you find more malevolent spirits.
Mm-hmm.
Even as far as the crematorium. We've gone to the crematorium and actually got, some pretty negative. You've got shadows. You've got a whole lot more negative activity going on. And, then, of course, you go across the creek, across the bridge, and that's where the fences are, and that's where you can't get on the property. And Nikki's saying residual energy. Some of it is, I would agree. But with residual energy, you won't have intelligent communication. And that would be the difference between, I see the residual energy or the reoccurring spirits as basically the record player playing over and over again. But with those, you won't get the EVPs. You won't get communication because it's not intelligent. It's just energy replaying itself, and usually over like anniversary periods and whatnot. But these particular spirits in the dairy farm are actually communicating back and forth, so it's not residual particularly. And
Eric,
yeah, go ahead.
Can I just say for all of our local listeners that are listening on Spreaker and on KSVU. The cemetery there that's right beside the dairy farm, if you just go a little bit farther up the highway there is a nice parking lot there for you to go to. The cemetery is a very beautiful area. If any of our locals or listeners are, have a day off or just some extra time, head on up there, throw some flowers down for those people. A lot of
Agreed.
them are never, they don't get that a lot.
Especially the
I try
lost
and make
ones.
at least, yeah, and I try and make at least 2 trips up there a year with flowers, and leave them. I just leave mine at. There's a large marble slab as a memoriam for all the people that died there.
And you know what irritates me about the cemetery, I think the most, is all the headstones. They're not really headstones. They're metal plates, and they're numbers. They don't have names. There is only one headstone on that whole cemetery that has a name to it. And I can't remember the name. I've got a picture of it because we actually caught an orb on the headstone. And it's blue. It's not dust. It's not an insect. It's a blue metallic orb.
And it's at the very back of the cemetery.
Exactly, against the fence. And that's the only one with the name.
But aren't there like 1,600 people that are missing still? I mean, because after it was closed down and they went into the crematorium, they found like the urns and stuff like that, and they weren't named, they weren't marked or anything, and there was something like 1,600 of them they could not identify. Is that about the right number?
I'm not the one versed in history. My historian couldn't make it tonight, and she's done extensive documentation and research on Northern State. What I like to do is, go back there, get some names from EVPs, and actually try to track them, see if they're doctors. There's actually one spirit that communicated, and I'm trying to remember how that went. We have a suspicion that they might have been a therapist, because back then they didn't call themselves psychiatrists. I don't think. Don't get me wrong. When did psychiatry start? Because this may have been a patient that was actually a therapist. I'm not sure.
Well, psychiatry started long before that hospital.
Right, and I agree. But this individual, I think the word they said was empath, because we asked them what their field was or what they did at Northern State, and they said empath. Which, if you look in the 1900s, you say empath, I automatically think therapist.
Yeah.
So it was a very, very interesting trip that we took that particular time. And that's why we go to a spot like that with the team for training. Because we take our new team, our 2 new team members there, and we show them how the equipment works. Because you're going to get something. Whether
I
it's
would
a rule.
think back then, though, there was a huge difference between psychiatrist and therapist.
And quite possibly. Again,
a therapist is there for the person. A psychiatrist is there to study.
True. I just thought it was really intriguing that a spirit would say empath, coming from that time era.
Yeah. That's not a word that I honestly ever hardly heard before I joined this group. Like, honestly,
true.
no, like, you don't, it's not a word that's used quite often, and even throughout history it hasn't been used.
No. And coming through an EVP in a...
So what do you think what are you thinking then?
I still think it was a patient that was a therapist, to be honest with you.
No, I get that part, but using the word empath, like you were saying, that wasn't a word, that they would have used back then. What would cause a spirit from that time era or something that would use a word that would be so much more modern? I'm not sure if I'm wording that right.
So,
to me,
I think what you mean, Cole, is people use the word today, empath, too often. They watered it down.
Yeah.
Correct?
Yeah, well, that, and also, like, maybe being dead so long,
Mm-hmm.
and a spirit himself, he ran into